Hi, everyone. Welcome to day one of our new reading unit, which is fantasy reading. We're really excited because we hope that you guys are excited too. So, the first lesson is what makes a book a fantasy and choosing a book to read. So, let's talk about what fantasy is as a genre. So, it's a genre of fiction, meaning it's not real, and it includes characters and events that could not happen in real life. So you might have read books before with some dragons or some magic. And guess what? That was fantasy. Now, what are the elements of fantasy or the things to look for when we read a fantasy book? So, a lot of fantasy books contain magic and sorcery, supernatural events, meaning events that could not happen in real life. There may be talking animals or creatures. They might have real people, like, for example, Harry Potter, in imaginary worlds and settings. So, Harry Potter is a person, a normal kid in middle school, but he's in an imaginary world or a setting in which things are happening that are supernatural. There might be characters with magical powers. Now, some common plots in fantasy are some storylines that typically happen. A lot of times, fantasies have this element of a battle between good and evil. So, if I'm thinking about Harry Potter, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, Harry battles some evil in that book series. It might also be about a hero's journey. So, a fantasy novel or book might revolve around a hero that goes on a quest or a journey. Another common plot in fantasy is that the characters are battling a make believe monster, such as a dragon or some other sort type of monster. Now, here's some characters that you may find in a fantasy book. You don't have to, but you might. These are just to give you some ideas. There might be witches. If you've ever read or seen the movie A Wrinkle in Time, right? Mrs. Who, Mrs. What's It, Mrs. Witch. Those were kind of like witches. There might be wizards, knights, dragons, princes and princesses, or talking animals. A book you choose to read also might have fairies or different kinds of creatures. These are just to give you some ideas when you start to look for a fantasy book. Maybe the book you choose has elves and gnomes. The last thing I want to talk about is some popular fantasy books or series. Some of these are even movies that you might be familiar with. So you might have even read some fantasy books and not even realized before that you were reading the fantasy genre. So a really popular one that I'm sure you're all familiar with is The Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland. A lot of curious and supernatural things happen in that book and that movie. The Chronicles of Narnia. So that's a series. The first one being The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You might be familiar with that book series or have watched the movie. Harry Potter, which I think is the big one that most of us are familiar with. Warriors. I included it down here. That might be a series that you're familiar with. Or Animorphs is another popular one. And finally, A Wrinkle in Time, which just came out recently. So today, now that you understand what fantasy is and what it could look like, some of the elements of fantasy, it's going to be your job to find a fantasy book. And you can do that on Epic, at home that you want to look at, or if you have any other e-reader app like the Simply E New York Public Library app, you can find a fantasy book on there. So today, take your time, make sure that you look for a fantasy ebook or actual book that you have at home, and then fill out the Google form to let us know what you're reading. Starting tomorrow, we're also going to be doing a read aloud, which will be really nice, of a fantasy book that I'm excited about. It's a cool mystery magical book that'll be really exciting. So good luck exploring and make sure you have fun. Bye.